Caleb Weston hadn't touched his dead daughter's door in 17 years. Tonight his hand was shaking against the brass handle, because a bruised child had just crawled through his locked gate, looked him straight in the eyes, and whispered words that stopped his heart. "My mama said you owe me something you don't even know about." Those eyes. God help him. Those were Maggie's eyes. If you want to know what debt could possibly connect a millionaire rancher to a beaten orphan, subscribe now and stay until the very end. Comment below which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The child's blood left a trail in the snow. Caleb saw it first from the window, a dark line cutting through the white, leading from the road to his front porch like a wound that wouldn't close. He'd been standing there for hours, the way he always stood on nights when sleep wouldn't come. 17 years of nights like this. 17 years of staring at nothing and seeing everything. Then the pounding started. Not knocking. Pounding. Small fists against oak, desperate and arrhythmic. He crossed the room in 4 strides and yanked the door open. A girl collapsed at his feet. She couldn't have been more than 10. Dress torn at the shoulder. One shoe missing. Hair matted with ice and something darker. She hit the floor hard, and the sound she made wasn't a scream. It was worse. It was the sound of someone who'd forgotten how to ask for help. Caleb dropped to his knees. Easy now. Easy. He reached for her shoulder, but she flinched so hard her whole body curled inward, like she expected his touch to hurt. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said, keeping his voice low. "You hear me? I ain't gonna hurt you." She looked up. Caleb's heart stopped. Those eyes. Green as spring grass after rain. The exact shade Maggie's had been, the shade that used to catch light even in the darkest room. "You're him," the girl whispered. Her voice came out scraped raw, like she'd been screaming for hours before she went silent. The man with the iron sun. The iron sun. The gate he'd forged himself the year Lily was born. The gate he'd chained shut 17 years ago and never opened since. "How do you know about that gate?" "Mama told me." The girl's eyes fluttered. She was fading. "Before she died, she said, find the ranch with the iron sun. Said the man there owes me something." "Owes you what?" "Something he don't even know about." Her eyes closed. Her body went limp. Caleb caught her before her head hit the floor. She weighed nothing. Bones and breath and borrowed time. He lifted her like she was made of glass and carried her to the settee by the fire. The door behind him was still open. Snow swirled and cold and indifferent. He didn't care. He laid her down and pulled the wool blanket, Maggie's blanket, the one with the blue stripe, over her shaking body. The firelight caught the bruises on her arms. Finger marks. Someone had grabbed her hard enough to leave proof. His jaw tightened. The back door creaked and Samuel Crow Feather stepped inside. He'd heard the commotion from the bunkhouse. His dark eyes moved from Caleb to the girl to the blood on the floor, and he didn't ask a single question. He just nodded once. "She can stay," he said. Then he turned and walked back into the night. The girl woke 2 hours later. Caleb hadn't moved from the chair across from her, hadn't slept, hadn't even blinked more than necessary. He'd just sat there watching her breathe, trying to make sense of something that refused to make sense. Those eyes, Maggie's eyes, in a stranger's face. She stirred. The blanket shifted. Her hand went immediately to her throat, checking for something that wasn't there. "It's gone," she said, flat, accepting. "He took it before I ran." "Took what?" "Mama's locket." She sat up slowly, wincing. "Had her picture in it. Only thing I had left of her." Caleb leaned forward. "Who took it?" She looked at him then. Really looked. And something in her face hardened, not with hate, but with the kind of resignation that shouldn't exist in a child. "You going to send me back?" "Depends on where back is." "Reverend Crane's house, in town." She pulled the blanket tighter. "He's my guardian. Got papers that say so. Got the sheriff and the church and everyone believing he's a saint. And what do you believe? I believe saints don't lock children in cellars. Her voice didn't waver. I believe saints don't use belts when they pray. Caleb's hands curled into fists. He forced them flat against his knees. What's your name? Emma Grace Coulter. And your mama, the one who told you about my gate? Sarah Coulter. Emma watched him carefully, like she was waiting for the name to mean something. But that wasn't her born name. She changed it when she was young. Said she had to. Had to, why? Because her mama gave her away. Emma's chin lifted, just slightly, defiant. When she was a baby, gave her to relatives and never looked back. The room felt smaller suddenly. The fire felt hotter. Caleb's throat felt like someone had wrapped a hand around it and squeezed. Your grandmother, he said slowly. What was her name? Margaret. But she went by Maggie. The hand squeezed tighter. My mama never met her, Emma continued. She died before I was born. But Mama talked about her sometimes. Said she had green eyes like mine. Said she married a rancher somewhere in Montana and had another daughter, a real daughter, one she kept. Caleb couldn't speak. Maggie. His Maggie. The woman who'd died of typhoid 17 years ago. The woman he'd buried on the hill beside their daughter. The woman whose secrets he thought he knew. She'd had another child, a child she'd given away before they ever met. A child who'd grown up, had a daughter of her own, and died leaving that daughter with nothing but a name and a direction. Find the ranch with the iron sun. Mr. Emma's voice cut through the roaring in his ears. You all right? You look like you seen a ghost. He had. He was looking at one right now. Right. Samuel came back at dawn with coffee that could strip paint and biscuits that wouldn't break teeth. He set them on the table without ceremony and sat down across from Emma like this was any other morning. You sleep all right? Yes, sir. That settee's got a broken spring on the left side. Pokes you if you ain't careful. I found it. Figured you might. Something passed between them. Not a smile, but close. Samuel had a way of seeing people without making them feel watched. Caleb had never learned that trick. Emma ate everything on her plate. Didn't complain about the bitter coffee or the biscuits that tasted like sawdust. She cleaned her plate and then sat there, hands folded, waiting. You don't have to wait for permission, Caleb said. You want more, you take it. She looked at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. That ain't how it works, she said quietly. At Reverend Crane's you take what you're given and you're grateful for it. Otherwise, she didn't finish. She didn't have to. Caleb stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. Emma flinched. He made himself stop, made himself breathe, made his voice come out level. This ain't his house, he said. His rules don't apply here. You understand? She nodded slowly, but her eyes said she didn't believe him yet. Trust like that didn't come from words. It came from time, from proof, from promises kept instead of broken. He had a lot of proving to do. The morning passed in small discoveries. Emma helped with chores without being asked. She gathered eggs from the henhouse, correctly guessing where it was from the sound of the chickens. She carried firewood from the pile to the porch, making 4 trips to Caleb's one. She found a broom somewhere and swept the kitchen floor, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd learned that usefulness was the only currency that kept you safe. You always work this hard? Caleb asked. Work keeps trouble away. He didn't ask what kind of trouble. He already knew. By noon, she'd made herself indispensable. The horses liked her. Even the bay mare, who'd kicked 2 ranch hands in the past year, stood calm under her small hands. The barn cat, a mean orange tom, that scratched everyone who came near, followed her around like a shadow. That cat don't like nobody, Samuel observed from the barn door. Scratched me 3 times this week. Emma scratched behind its torn ear. Maybe you ain't been polite enough. Samuel's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Caleb watched from the fence, something shifting in his chest. Something warm, something he didn't trust. That evening, Emma found the photographs. She was standing by the mantel firelight flickering across her face, staring at the tarnished silver frame that held Maggie's portrait. She didn't touch it. Just stood there looking. "That's her," she said when Caleb came in. "My grandmother." He stopped in the doorway. "She was real pretty," Emma continued. "Mama always said she was. Said she had a smile that could light up a room." She paused. "She ain't smiling in this picture, though." "No, she ain't." Emma turned to look at him. Those eyes, Maggie's eyes, studying him, the way she'd studied everything since she arrived. Taking inventory, building a picture. "You loved her," she said. Not a question. "I did." "And the other one?" She nodded toward a smaller frame half hidden behind the first. "The little girl." Caleb's throat closed. Lily's picture. He'd taken it himself one summer afternoon when she was 4. She'd been laughing at something he couldn't remember what anymore. Her face tilted toward the sun, her small hands reaching for butterflies that weren't there. "That was my daughter," he said. "Was..." The word hung in the air. Heavy. Final. "She died. Long time ago." Emma didn't offer condolences. Didn't say she was sorry, or that she understood. She just stood there, small and still, letting the silence hold what words couldn't. "What was her name?" she asked finally. "Lily." "That's pretty." Emma looked at the picture again. "She's got your eyes. Sad ones." Caleb's hands clenched at his sides. "You got a sadness on you," Emma said, turning to face him fully. "I saw it the minute you opened that door. Sits on your shoulders like snow that won't melt." No one had spoken to him like that in 17 years. No one had seen him in 17 years, not past the land and the cattle and the money. He was Caleb Weston, the richest man in the Bitterroot Valley. He was not a man with sadness on his shoulders. Except he was. And this child, this bruised wisp of a girl who'd appeared at his door like a ghost, had seen it in the first 12 hours. "I got one too," Emma said quietly. "A sadness. Maybe that's why I found your gate. Maybe sadness calls to sadness." Before he could respond, she walked past him toward the settee, wrapped herself in Maggie's blanket, and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing evened out. She was asleep. Caleb stood there watching her, thinking about iron sun gates and chains that rusted through, and daughters, all the daughters who'd needed him and never gotten what they needed. On the third day, she asked about the locked door. They were eating breakfast. Samuel's biscuits again, slightly better this time, when Emma's eyes drifted toward the hallway. Toward the dark oak door at the end, the one with the brass handle that hadn't been touched in 17 years. "What's in there?" she asked. Caleb's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Storage," he said. Emma nodded, accepted the answer. But something flickered in her eyes that said she knew a lie when she heard one. She didn't push. Children who'd lived the life she'd lived learned not to push. But she'd remember. She'd add it to the inventory she was building. And someday, when she trusted him enough, or when he proved himself unworthy of trust, she'd use it. Caleb set down his fork. "I'm going to check the north pasture," he said. "Samuel, keep an eye on things here." Samuel nodded. His dark eyes moved from Caleb to Emma to the locked door at the end of the hall. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Caleb rode for 3 hours trying to outrun his own thoughts. It didn't work. Maggie had kept secrets from him. A daughter, a whole human being, hidden away like something shameful, and that daughter had grown up, had a child of her own, and died whispering about debts and iron suns and men who owed things they didn't know about. What debt? What could he possibly owe to a child he'd never met for a daughter? Maggie had never told him existed. The answer came to him somewhere near the creek, where the ice was starting to form along the edges. He owed her what he'd failed to give everyone else: presents. He'd been in Billings when Lily died, 60 miles away shaking hands on a cattle deal while his daughter burned with fever and called for her papa and got only silence in return. He'd been stone when Maggie needed softness, walls when she needed doors, silence when she needed words. She'd left him 3 years before she died, left him alone in that big house with all his money and all his grief and not one person to share either one. She'd died in a boarding house in Bozeman, surrounded by strangers still wearing her wedding ring. He'd found out from a letter from a stranger, because the woman who'd loved him enough to marry him had stopped believing he would come, had stopped believing he could feel anything at all. And now her granddaughter, the grandchild of the secret daughter she'd given away before any of this started, was sleeping in his house, wearing bruises from a man who claimed to serve God. What debt? The debt of showing up, the debt of staying, the debt of being human instead of stone. When Caleb returned, the sun was setting orange and gold across the valley. Emma was in the barn with Samuel learning to brush down the horses. She handled the curry comb like she'd been born to it, her small hands moving in careful circles over the bay mare's flank. "She's got a gift," Samuel said quietly, appearing at Caleb's elbow. "Animals trust her. Can't fake that." Caleb watched her for a long moment. "Her grandmother was the same way," he said. "Maggie could calm any horse, any dog, any creature. She used to say they could smell kindness." Samuel nodded slowly. "Apple don't fall far." "No, it don't." They stood there in silence watching Emma work. The barn cat wound between her legs, purring loud enough to hear from the door. The mare, who'd kicked 2 men this year alone, stood calm as Sunday under her hands. "That reverend's gonna come looking," Samuel said. "Not a question." "I know." "You ready for that?" Caleb thought about the bruises on Emma's arms, the way she flinched at sudden movements, the flatness in her voice when she talked about cellars and belts and prayers that came with pain. "I'm ready," he said, and for the first time in 17 years, he meant it. The rider came at dusk. Emma saw him first from the kitchen window. Her face went pale as milk, and she stepped back, hands gripping the counter so hard her knuckles turned white. "He found me," she whispered. Caleb walked past her toward the front door. His hand brushed her shoulder as he passed, gentle, deliberate, and she didn't flinch. "Stay inside," he said. He stepped out onto the porch. The rider was young, dressed rough, working for one of the spreads near town, but his horse had come from the direction of the church, and his eyes moved past Caleb toward the windows with too much interest. "Looking for a runaway," the rider said. "Girl about 10, brown hair, torn dress. Reverend Crane's ward. You seen her?" "Ain't seen nobody." The rider's eyes moved to the window where Emma's face had been, where she wasn't anymore. "You sure about that, Mr. Weston?" Caleb stepped forward, slow, deliberate, the kind of step that said the conversation was over whether the other man knew it yet or not. "I'm sure." The rider held his gaze for a long moment. Then he touched his hat brim, turned his horse, and rode back toward the road. Caleb watched until he was a speck on the horizon. Then he turned and walked back inside. Emma stood in the hallway, pressed against the wall, arms wrapped around herself. She was shaking. "He'll be back," she said. "Reverend Crane don't give up. He'll bring the sheriff. He'll bring papers. He'll make everyone believe I'm the liar and he's the saint. Let him come." Emma looked up at him. Those green eyes, Maggie's eyes, full of fear and hope, and something that looked almost like trust. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You don't know me. I ain't nothing to you. Why would you—" "You're something," Caleb said. The words came out rougher than he intended. "I don't know what yet, but you're something." She stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Outside the wind picked up. Snow clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy, with the promise of a storm. Something was coming. Caleb could feel it in his bones, and for the first time in 17 years, he wasn't going to run from it. The storm hit that night like something with teeth. Emma woke to the sound of wind tearing at the windows and found Caleb standing by the door, rifle in hand, staring out at the white wall of snow. "Is he coming?" she asked. "Not tonight. Nobody's coming through this." She pulled the blanket tighter and watched him. The firelight caught the lines on his face, the gray in his hair, the way his shoulders hunched forward like he was carrying something invisible and heavy. "You don't sleep much, do you?" she said. He turned. "What makes you say that?" "I know what it looks like, the not sleeping. My mama had it too at the end. She'd sit by the window all night watching the road, like she was waiting for someone who wasn't coming." Caleb set the rifle against the wall and lowered himself into the chair across from her. The fire crackled between them. Who was she waiting for? "Don't know. She never said." Emma picked at a thread on the blanket. "Sometimes I think she was waiting for her mama, the one who gave her away. Even after all those years, I think she still hoped." "Hope's a hard thing to kill." "So's disappointment." Caleb looked at her. This child who spoke like someone 3 times her age, who understood things no 10-year-old should understand. "Your mama," he said slowly. "She ever tell you anything else about Maggie? About why she gave her up?" Emma was quiet for a moment. The wind howled outside, rattling the glass. "She said Maggie was young, 15, maybe 16. Said the father was someone important, someone who couldn't claim a child born that way. So Maggie's family sent her away to have the baby in secret, and when it was born, they gave it to relatives out east. And Maggie never saw her again. Never. Mama said she tried to find her once years later, wrote letters to the town where she thought Maggie lived, but the letters came back unopened." Emma's voice dropped. "Mama figured Maggie didn't want to be found. Figured she'd built a new life and couldn't risk having the old one come knocking." Caleb's chest ached. He thought about Maggie, the woman he'd married, the woman who'd laughed at his jokes and sung hymns while she cooked and held his hand through thunderstorms because she knew he hated the noise. She'd been carrying this the whole time, a daughter she'd lost, a grief she'd buried so deep even he couldn't see it, and he'd thought he knew her. "Mr. Weston." He blinked. Emma was watching him with those green eyes, Maggie's eyes, and something in her face had softened. "You didn't know," she said, not accusing, just stating fact. "About any of it. She never told you." "No, she never did." "Does that make you angry?" He thought about it, really thought. "No," he said finally. "It makes me sad. Sad she felt like she couldn't tell me. Sad she had to carry it alone." Emma nodded slowly like he'd passed some kind of test. "My mama carried things alone too," she said. "Even when I was right there, even when I wanted to help, she wouldn't let me in. Said some weights weren't meant for children." She was right. Maybe. But it didn't make watching her any easier. They sat in silence for a long while. The storm raged outside, but inside something had quieted. Something had settled. "You should sleep," Caleb said finally. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "What happens tomorrow?" "Storm breaks, and when it does, the Reverend will come." Emma's face tightened. "What are you going to do?" Caleb looked at her. This child who'd crawled through his gate in the middle of the night. This child who carried his wife's blood in her veins and his wife's secrets in her memory. "I'm going to keep you safe," he said, "whatever it takes." She stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she lay back down and pulled the blanket to her chin. "My mama said you were a good man who forgot how to be good," she whispered. "I think maybe she was wrong. I think you just forgot you were allowed." She closed her eyes. Caleb sat there until the fire burned down to embers, watching her breathe, thinking about forgetting and remembering, and all the things he'd locked away in the 17 years since they put Lily in the ground. The storm died sometime before dawn. By the time the sun came up weak and pale through the breaking clouds, the world had been remade in white. Samuel came in stomping snow from his boots, his face grave. "Riders on the North Road," he said. 3 of them. "Coming slow." Caleb stood. "How far?" 20 minutes, maybe less." Emma was already awake, sitting up on the settee, her face pale, but her jaw set. She'd heard. "He brought help," she said flatly. "He always does." "You know these men." "The sheriff, Tom McAllister. He's scared of Reverend Crane, but he does what he's told." She paused. "The other one's probably Deputy Warren. He's worse. He believes everything the Reverend says." Caleb walked to the window and looked out at the white expanse of his land, his cattle, his money, his empire. None of it mattered. What mattered was the bruised child sitting behind him, watching his back, waiting to see if he was different from everyone else who'd failed her. "Samuel," he said without turning, "take Emma to the barn. Keep her out of sight until I say otherwise." "No." He turned. Emma was standing now, Maggie's blanket clutched around her shoulders like armor. "I ain't hiding," she said. "I've been hiding my whole life. From him, from the truth, from everything. I ain't doing it no more." "Emma, you said you was going to keep me safe. But safe don't mean invisible. It means someone finally standing up and saying what he did out loud where people can hear it." Her voice shook, but she didn't look away. Caleb felt something crack inside his chest, something old and hard that had been calcified there for 17 years. This child had more courage than he'd had in 2 decades. "All right," he said quietly. "You want to stand, you stand. But you stay behind me. And if I tell you to run, you run. You understand?" She nodded once, sharp, soldier-like. "I understand." The riders appeared through the snow 10 minutes later. Reverend Josiah Crane rode in front, dressed all in black, his face arranged in an expression of concerned piety. Behind him came Sheriff McAllister, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else, and Deputy Warren, whose eyes were already scanning the property like he owned it. Caleb stepped off the porch to meet them. "Mr. Weston." Crane dismounted with practiced grace. His voice carried that smooth sermon polish that made everything sound reasonable. "I apologize for the intrusion. I'm sure you understand my concern." "Can't say I do." Crane's smile flickered. Just for an instant. Then it was back smooth as butter. "A child in my care has gone missing. A troubled child, I'm afraid. Given to lies and manipulation. She has a way of making herself appear the victim." He spread his hands. "I'm only here to bring her home." "Funny thing about homes," Caleb said. "They ain't supposed to leave marks." Crane's eyes hardened. "I'm not sure I understand your meaning." "I think you do." Sheriff McAllister cleared his throat. "Mr. Weston, the Reverend, has legal papers. The girl's mother signed custody over to the church before she passed. It's all documented, witnessed, filed with the county." "Then the county's wrong." "The law's the law, Caleb." McAllister dismounted, his movements slow and reluctant. "I don't like it any more than you do, but I got a duty." "Your duty's to protect people, Tom. All people. Even the ones who can't protect themselves." "The child is protected." Crane stepped forward, and there was something in his voice now, something that slithered beneath the smoothness. "She's fed, clothed, educated in the ways of the Lord. I provide for all her needs." "Do you provide the belt marks on her back too, or is that extra?" Silence. Deputy Warren's hand moved toward his sidearm. Samuel stepped out of the barn, his presence quiet but unmistakable. Crane's face had gone very still. The mask was slipping. "These are serious accusations, Mr. Weston. Accusations without proof. The word of a known liar against a man of God." "Then let's get proof." Caleb turned toward the house. "Emma, come on out." The door opened. Emma stepped onto the porch. Maggie's blanket still around her shoulders. She was shaking, but she stood straight, chin lifted, eyes fixed on Crane with something that wasn't quite hatred. It was worse than hatred. It was knowing. "Tell them," Caleb said. "Tell them what he did." Emma's voice came out clear as winter air. "He locks me in the cellar when I sin, sometimes for days. No food, no water, just the dark and the cold." She didn't look away from Crane, not once. "He uses his belt when I talk back. Broke 2 of my ribs last spring when I tried to run the first time." "Lies," Crane said softly. "The desperate lies of a troubled child." "Then explain the bruises." Caleb stepped toward him. "Finger-shaped bruises on her arms. The kind you get when someone grabs you hard and don't let go. Go on, Reverend. Explain those." McAllister shifted uncomfortably. "Caleb, children fall. They play rough. Children don't flinch when you raise your hand to scratch your own head." Caleb's voice was rising now. "They don't curl up in a ball when someone walks too close. They don't know what a belt sounds like before it lands." The wind picked up, sending snow swirling between them. Crane's mask had fallen away completely now. What was underneath was cold and hard, and utterly without mercy. "The law is on my side, Mr. Weston. The papers are valid. The county recognizes my custody." He reached into his coat and produced a folded document. "I have a warrant for the child's return, signed by Judge Patterson this morning." McAllister took the paper, read it, and his shoulders slumped. "It's legitimate, Caleb. I got no choice here." "There's always a choice, Tom." "Not for me, there ain't." The sheriff looked at Emma, and something like shame flickered across his face. "I'm sorry, girl. I truly am. But the law says a man of God can beat a child and call it salvation." Emma's voice cut through like a knife. "The law says I got to go back to a cellar that smells like mold and fear. The law says my blood on his floor don't count because he prays real loud while he's spilling it." Silence again, heavier this time. Deputy Warren had stopped reaching for his gun. He was staring at Emma with something that looked almost like uncertainty. Crane stepped forward and grabbed Emma's arm. She cried out a small, sharp sound of pain, and Caleb moved before he knew he was moving. His fist connected with Crane's jaw. The Reverend went down hard, sprawling in the snow, his black coat spreading around him like wings. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. McAllister drew his pistol. "Caleb, don't." He put hands on her. Caleb stood over Crane, breathing hard, his fist still clenched. "In front of witnesses." He put hands on her and she cried out in pain. "You going to arrest him for that, Tom? Or does the law only work one direction?" Crane pushed himself up on his elbows, wiping blood from his lip. His eyes were burning. "You just assaulted a man of God," he hissed. "In front of the sheriff. In front of—" "I just protected a child from a man who hurts children." Caleb turned to McAllister. "You saw him grab her. You heard her cry. You going to stand there and tell me that's Christian kindness?" McAllister holstered his pistol slowly. His face was gray. "I got papers, Caleb. I got to follow the law." "Then follow it tomorrow. Today there's a blizzard coming." Caleb pointed toward the horizon where dark clouds were already massing. "Another storm bigger than the last. You try to take her now, you'll all freeze before you reach town." It was a lie. The clouds were moving away, not toward. But McAllister didn't know these mountains, didn't know weather the way Caleb knew it. The sheriff hesitated. "One day," Caleb said. "One day for me to get this sorted. Talk to Judge Patterson myself. Show him proof." "What proof?" "The proof that child is my kin." Crane laughed a sharp, ugly sound. "Your kin? That's absurd. She's an orphan. No family, no—" "Her grandmother was my wife." The words fell like stones into still water. Everyone went still. Even the wind seemed to pause. "Margaret Weston." Caleb continued, his voice steady. "Maggie. She had a daughter before she married me. Gave her up as a girl, kept it secret her whole life. That daughter grew up, had a daughter of her own. Emma's mother, and died 2 years ago of consumption." He looked at Emma standing there with Maggie's eyes in a stranger's face. "That makes Emma my wife's granddaughter. That makes her my kin. And that means I got standing to contest this custody." Crane's face had gone white. "You're lying. You have no proof." "I got letters." The lie came easier now. "Maggie kept letters from her daughter. I found them after she passed. Names, dates enough to take to a judge." "Then produce them." "Tomorrow, when the storm breaks." Caleb met Crane's eyes without flinching. "You come back tomorrow with your papers and your sheriff, and I'll have my letters and my lawyer. We'll let the law sort it out proper." Silence stretched. McAllister looked at the sky, at the clouds that weren't actually threatening at the out Caleb was offering. "One day," the sheriff said finally. "Sun up tomorrow. We'll be back with a federal marshal from Helena, someone with authority over custody disputes." "Tom," Crane started. "One day, Reverend." McAllister's voice had hardened. Something had shifted in him, something that had been watching a little too closely, thinking a little too hard. "I'm sure a man of God can wait one day to recover his ward." Crane looked at Emma. The hatred in his eyes was naked now, unconcealed. "I'll see you tomorrow, child," he said softly. "We have much to discuss about honesty and obedience." Emma didn't flinch, didn't look away. "So do I," she said. "About what happens to saints who ain't." The riders left. Caleb watched them go until they were specks on the horizon, swallowed by the white. Then he turned and found Emma standing behind him, shaking so hard she could barely stand. "You lied," she whispered. "About the letters, about the storm." "I did." "Why?" He knelt down so their eyes were level. "Because sometimes the truth ain't enough," he said. "Sometimes you got to buy time with whatever currency you got." "But they'll find out. Tomorrow they'll come back and there won't be no letters, and tomorrow's a long way off." Caleb put a hand on her shoulder, gentle, careful, and she didn't pull away. "Tonight you're safe. That's all that matters right now." She stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his chest. She didn't cry. She didn't make a sound. She just stood there, small and shaking, letting him hold her up. Caleb wrapped his arms around her and held on. He thought about Lily. About the last time he'd held his daughter 3 days before she died, before the fever took her, when she'd still been laughing and reaching for butterflies. He thought about Maggie. About all the times she'd reached for him, and he'd been too stone hard to reach back. He thought about the 17 years he'd spent building walls against grief, and how easily this child had walked right through them. "I got you," he said quietly. "You hear me? Whatever happens tomorrow, I got you." Emma's hands came up and gripped the back of his coat. "I believe you," she whispered. And somehow that was the hardest thing of all. That evening, Samuel made stew that actually tasted like food and biscuits that didn't threaten teeth. They ate at the table, all 3 of them, like a family that had been doing this for years instead of days. Emma kept looking at Caleb like she was waiting for him to change his mind, like kindness was a loan that would come due any moment. "You keep staring at me like that, I'm going to think I got something on my face," Caleb said. Emma dropped her eyes. "Sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just tell me what you're thinking." She pushed a piece of potato around her plate. "I'm thinking this ain't real," she said quietly. "I'm thinking I'm going to wake up tomorrow and be back in that cellar, and this whole thing, the fire, the food, you will just be something I dreamed up to survive." Samuel set down his spoon. "You ever been told a story and then found out it was true?" Emma looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean sometimes the world gives us things we don't believe we deserve. Things that feel too good to be real." Samuel's dark eyes held hers. "But just because we don't believe, don't mean they ain't true. How do you know the difference?" You don't. Not at first. You just keep waking up, keep finding the good things still there, and eventually your believing catches up with the truth. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Caleb. Are you going to be there tomorrow when they come back? I ain't going nowhere. Even if they got more papers, even if they bring marshals and lawyers and the whole territory. Even then. Why? The word came out raw. Desperate. I ain't nothing to you. Not really. A piece of paper that says my grandmother was your wife don't make me your blood. Don't make me your responsibility. You could walk away clean. You could. I could. Caleb agreed. But I ain't going to. Why not? He thought about how to answer. About the truth and the lies and the space between them where real things lived. Because 17 years ago, I walked away from the people who needed me most, he said. And I've been living with that ever since. I ain't doing it again. Not for you, not for anyone. Emma's eyes glistened. She blinked hard and looked down at her plate. My mama walked away too, she said quietly. Not because she wanted to, because she had to. The sickness took her before she could finish what she started. What did she start? She was writing letters. To a lawyer in Helena. She'd been saving money for years, pennies, nickels, whatever she could hide from the Reverend. She was going to fight for me. Get me out legal proper so no one could drag me back. Emma's hands curled into fists on the table. She died 3 letters in. The Reverend found them after, burned them in front of me, said it was God's will that I stay, said fighting against him was fighting against the Lord. Caleb felt something hot and sharp rising in his chest, something that felt like fury and grief and protection all tangled together. Your mama sounds like a fighter. She was. Emma looked up. She used to say, the world breaks everyone, but some people get stronger in the broken places. She got that from a book. Read it to me so many times I memorized it. Smart woman. She was. Emma's voice cracked. She was the smartest woman I ever knew. And she died in a bed that wasn't hers, in a town that didn't know her name trying to save a daughter she couldn't keep. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't want you to die for me, Mr. Weston. I don't want anyone else dying for something I can't pay back. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were small and cold and trembling. Ain't about paying back, he said. It's about paying forward. Your mama fought for you. Her mama Maggie, she fought too in her own way. Kept that secret to protect the life she'd built, but never stopped hoping her daughter would find peace. He squeezed her hand. Now it's my turn, not because I have to, because I want to, because this is what family does. We ain't family. We are now. Emma stared at him. The fire crackled, the wind whispered against the windows, and then slowly her fingers curled around his and held on tight. After dinner, Emma fell asleep on the settee with the orange cat curled against her chest. Samuel sat in the corner chair, supposedly reading, but Caleb knew he was watching, guarding. Samuel never really slept when there was danger nearby. Caleb stood at the window, looking out at the dark. You going to tell me what you're thinking? Samuel asked without looking up from his book. I'm thinking I just promised that girl something I don't know how to deliver. What makes you say that? I got no letters, no proof, just a lie I told to buy time. Caleb turned from the window. When Crane comes back tomorrow with a federal marshal, I got nothing to show. They'll take her, and everything I said will be just words. Samuel set down his book. You remember what Maggie was like, those last months before she left? Caleb went still. They didn't talk about this. They'd never talked about this. She was sad, Samuel continued. Sad in a way that went deeper than Clara. Deeper than grief. Like she was carrying something old and heavy that she couldn't put down. You think it was the daughter, the one she gave up. I think it was everything. The daughter, the secret, the life she'd built on top of a grave that wasn't really a grave. Samuel's dark eyes held Caleb's. I think she loved you as much as she could, but there was a part of her that couldn't be loved, a part that was already gone before you ever met. Why are you telling me this now? Because you're about to fight for her granddaughter, and you need to know what you're really fighting for. Samuel stood slowly. It ain't just about Emma, it's about Maggie, about Clara, about every person you ever loved and lost and couldn't save. I can't save any of them. They're dead. They are. But she ain't. Samuel nodded toward the sleeping girl. She's alive. She's here. And she's giving you a chance to do what you couldn't do before. Which is, stay. The word hung in the air between them. That's all anyone ever wanted from you, Caleb. Just for you to stay. To be there when it mattered. To show up instead of running away. Samuel walked toward the door. Tomorrow when they come, you stay. Whatever happens after you stay, that's how you pay the debt. He opened the door and stepped out into the cold. Caleb stood alone in the quiet room, listening to Emma breathe, thinking about staying and leaving, and all the years between. The locked door at the end of the hall seemed to glow in the darkness, waiting. He walked toward it. His hand closed around the brass handle, the same handle he'd touched 1,000 times in 17 years, but never turned, and this time he turned it. The door swung open. The smell hit him first. Dust and cedar, and something faint beneath. Something that might have been lavender once. Might have been the soap Maggie used to wash Lily's hair. He stepped inside. The room was small. A child's bed with a white iron frame. A white quilt yellowed with age. A window facing east, curtains drawn. A shelf with 3 books. And on the pillow, exactly where Lily had left it 17 years ago, a porcelain doll with corn silk hair and blue glass eyes, and a painted smile that hadn't faded. Maggie had bought it for Lily's 2nd birthday. Lily had named it Rosie and carried it everywhere. Caleb walked to the bed. His boots left prints in the dust. The first prints in 17 years. He picked up the doll. It weighed nothing. Just cloth and porcelain in memory. But holding it, he felt the full weight of every day he'd refused to enter this room. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Lily, I'm so sorry I wasn't there." The silence didn't answer. He sat on the edge of the bed. The springs creaked. The quilt smelled of cedar and lost time. He didn't hear Emma come in. She stood in the doorway, lamplight spilling around her small frame. She looked at the room, at the small bed, at the doll in his hands. "This was hers," she said softly. "Your daughter's." Caleb nodded. Couldn't speak. Emma crossed the threshold. Her feet left smaller prints beside his in the dust. She walked to the bed and sat down next to him. Not close, but close enough. "What was she like?" Emma asked. The question opened something in him. Something he'd kept sealed so long he'd forgotten it was there. "She was springtime," he said. His voice cracked. He tried again. "That's what Maggie used to say. Said Lily came into the world like spring comes to the valley all at once, changing everything. That's beautiful." It was true. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and touched the doll's hair, gentle as a blessing. "My mama had a doll once. Lost it when she was young. Said it was the only thing she had from before." She paused. "Before she got given away." The connection hit Caleb like a fist. Maggie's daughter, Emma's mother, had been given away with nothing. No doll, no keepsake, no proof she'd ever been wanted. And here was Lily's doll, preserved like a relic, loved so hard it hurt. "Take it," he said. Emma looked up. "What?" "The doll." He held it out to her. Lily would have wanted someone to have it, someone who'd understand. Emma stared at him, at the doll, at the room full of dust and grief and 17 years of silence. "I can't." "You can. And you should." Caleb placed the doll in her hands. "It's been alone long enough. Both of you have. Emma looked down at the porcelain face, the painted smile, the corn silk hair. And then, for the first time since she'd arrived, she started to cry. Not quietly. Not the controlled tears of someone who'd learned to hide, but real shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken. Caleb put his arm around her and pulled her close. She leaned into him, the doll clutched to her chest, crying 17 years of someone else's tears. And Caleb held on. Outside, the stars came out cold and bright. The wind died to a whisper. And somewhere in the distance, a coyote called lonely and searching, and somehow impossibly answered. Tomorrow would bring the marshal and the reverend, and a fight Caleb didn't know how to win. But tonight he sat in his dead daughter's room with his dead wife's granddaughter, and he didn't run. He stayed. Caleb hadn't slept. He'd sat in Lily's room until Emma's crying stopped, until her breathing evened out, until the doll slipped from her fingers and lay beside her on the pillow like it belonged there. Then he'd carried her back to the settee, covered her with Maggie's blanket, and stood watch by the window until the first gray light crept over the mountains. Samuel found him there, still standing, still watching. "They'll be here within the hour," Samuel said quietly. "I spotted dust on the north road." "How many boy?" "4 riders, maybe 5. More than yesterday." Crane had brought reinforcements. Caleb turned from the window. His body ached, his eyes burned. But something in his chest had gone still and cold, the calm that came before a fight, before a storm, before everything changed forever. "Wake Emma," he said. "Get her fed. I want her strong for what's coming." Samuel nodded and moved toward the settee, but Emma was already sitting up, the doll clutched to her chest, her green eyes sharp and clear. "I heard," she said. "They're coming." "They are. And you still ain't got no letters." "No, I ain't." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she set the doll carefully on the cushion beside her and stood up. "Then we tell the truth," she said. "All of it. Everything he did. Everything I seen. And we pray someone believes us. Prayer ain't always enough. No. But it's what we got." She walked past him toward the kitchen, small and straight-backed, and braver than anyone he'd ever known. Caleb watched her go. Something twisted in his chest, pride and fear, and a fierce protective love that he didn't have a name for yet. He'd known this child for 5 days. He'd die for her without hesitation. The riders appeared just after sunrise. There were 5 of them, just as Samuel had predicted. Reverend Crane rode in front, his black coat brushed clean, his face arranged in that same mask of pious concern. Behind him came Sheriff McAllister, looking more tired and gray than yesterday. Deputy Warren followed, his hand resting on his holster like he expected trouble. But it was the last 2 riders that made Caleb's stomach tighten. One was a federal marshal, Caleb could tell by the star on his coat and the hard set of his jaw. The kind of man who followed the law because the law was all he had. The other was a woman. She was thin and sharp-featured, dressed in a severe black dress, her hair pulled back so tight it stretched her skin. She carried a leather satchel and wore spectacles that caught the morning light. "That's Mrs. Whitfield," Emma said from behind him. Her voice had gone flat. Dead. "She runs the county orphanage. Crane brings her when he wants to make things look official." "She on his side?" "Everyone's on his side. That's how he wins." Caleb stepped off the porch. The marshal dismounted first. He was older than Caleb expected, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by anything. "Mr. Weston, I'm Marshal James Holloway out of Helena." He didn't offer his hand. "I understand there's a custody dispute here." "There's a child being beaten by a man who calls himself holy. That's what there is." Holloway's expression didn't change. "The Reverend has legal papers, signed by the child's mother, witnessed by the church, filed with the county. You have anything to counter that?" Caleb opened his mouth to lie again, to stall, to buy time that didn't exist, but before he could speak, Crane stepped forward. Mr. Weston claims to have letters proving a blood connection to the child, Crane said smoothly. Letters from his deceased wife that establish Emma's grandmother as Margaret Weston. A convenient story, but entirely fabricated. He turned to Holloway with a sorrowful shake of his head. I'm afraid Mr. Weston has developed an unhealthy attachment to my ward. A lonely man, an empty house, a vulnerable child. You can imagine the temptation. The implication hung in the air like poison. Caleb's hands curled into fists. You watch your mouth, Reverend. I'm simply stating facts. You have no proof of any blood connection. No letters, no documents, no witnesses. Just the word of a reclusive widower against the testimony of the church, the county, and the law. Holloway looked at Caleb. Is that true? You got proof or not? The moment stretched. Caleb thought about lying again. Thought about stalling, fighting, doing anything to keep Emma from going back to that cellar. But lies had gotten him here. Lies had bought him one day that was already over. No, he said finally. I ain't got proof. Crane's smile widened. Victory. Then this matter is settled. Mrs. Whitfield, if you would be so kind as to collect the child. Wait. Everyone turned. Emma stood on the porch, her small frame rigid, her hands clenched at her sides. She wasn't looking at Crane. She was looking at the marshal. You want proof, she said. I'll give you proof. She walked down the steps, and with each step, Caleb saw something shift in her. The fear was still there. He could see it in the white of her knuckles, the tension in her jaw, but it was buried now, buried beneath something harder and brighter and more dangerous. She stopped in front of Holloway and pulled up her sleeve. These bruises, she said, holding out her arm. You see them finger-shaped. He grabbed me 2 days ago when I wouldn't scrub the church floors fast enough. She turned and lifted the back of her dress. Caleb heard someone gasp. Mrs. Whitfield, maybe. Or Deputy Warren. Emma's back was a map of violence. Old scars. Fresh welts. The crosshatch pattern of a belt applied with precision and fury. This is what his salvation looks like. Emma said, her voice steady as stone. This is what happens when I sin, when I talk back, when I look at him wrong. She turned to face Crane. Tell them I'm lying. Tell them I did this to myself. Tell them children fall. Crane's face had gone white. His mask had cracked, and what was underneath was ugly. The child is disturbed, he said, but his voice shook. She has a history of self-harm. I got a history of surviving. Emma's voice rose. I got a history of praying every night that someone would believe me, that someone would see what he was doing and make it stop. She looked at McAllister. You treated me once, Doc Harlan did. 2 broken ribs. I told him I fell off a horse. He knew I was lying. He knew, and he did nothing. McAllister's face went gray. I owed money to the church fund, he muttered. I couldn't. You couldn't save me because he had you bought. Emma's voice cracked, but she didn't stop. All of you, the whole town. He's got everyone believing he's a saint, and I'm just a troubled child who makes up stories. She turned back to Holloway. But you ain't from here. You don't owe him nothing. You can look at these marks and see the truth. You can choose to believe a child over a man in a black coat. Holloway's face was unreadable. He looked at Emma's arms at her back, at the evidence written on her body in bruises and scars. Then he looked at Crane. You want to explain this, Reverend? The child is manipulative. She injures herself for attention. That's a belt mark on her back. I've seen enough of them to know. Holloway stepped closer to Crane. That particular pattern, 3 lines close together, 1 wider stripe on the side that's from a razor strop, the kind a man might use for discipline, the kind a man might keep in his study. Crane's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I discipline the child according to Scripture. Spare the rod, spoil the child. It's my duty as her guardian to beat her bloody. The question came from behind. Everyone turned. Doc Harlan stood at the edge of the yard, his horse still stamping from a hard ride. His face was red, his eyes bloodshot, his hands shaking. But his voice was steady. "I treated that girl," he said, walking forward. "Last spring. 2 broken ribs. She said she fell off a horse, but there wasn't a horse on that property could break a child's ribs." He stopped in front of Crane. "I knew. God help me, I knew, and I said nothing because I was a coward." He turned to Holloway. "I'll testify, under oath in any court you name. I'll say what I saw, and what I should have done, and what I didn't do, because I was too scared of this man's influence." Holloway's eyes moved from Harlan to Crane, to Emma, to Caleb. Anyone else got something to say? Silence. Then Mrs. Whitfield spoke. "The children at the orphanage." Her voice was small, shaking. "Some of them came from Reverend Crane's care. They had marks, too. I always believed his explanations. I wanted to believe them." She took off her spectacles and wiped her eyes. "I wanted to believe a man of God wouldn't do such things. But looking at that child now, looking at what's written on her body..." She shook her head. "I was wrong. We were all wrong." Crane's mask shattered. The smooth composure, the pious concern, the sermon-polished voice, all of it fell away, and what was left was rage. Pure, cold, uncontained rage. "This is a conspiracy," he hissed. "A plot against a servant of the Lord. That man," he pointed at Caleb, "that man assaulted me, struck me in front of witnesses. And now you're taking his side, the side of a hermit, and a drunk and a child who lies as easily as she breathes." He grabbed for Emma. Caleb moved, but he wasn't fast enough. Samuel was. The old Blackfoot man seemed to appear from nowhere, his hand closing around Crane's wrist before the Reverend's fingers could touch Emma. "You don't touch her," Samuel said quietly. "Not again. Not ever." Crane tried to pull away, but Samuel's grip was iron. "Let go of me. I am a man of God. I am..." "You're a man who hurts children." Samuel's voice was calm, almost gentle. "I've known men like you. They wear different masks. Priests, chiefs, fathers, husbands. But underneath they're all the same. They take what isn't theirs and call it righteousness." He released Crane's wrist. "The spirits don't protect men like you, Reverend. They remember what you've done. And they wait." Crane stumbled back, rubbing his wrist, his eyes wild. Holloway stepped forward. "Josiah Crane, I'm placing you under arrest for assault on a minor. You'll be transported to Helena for trial." He looked at McAllister. "Sheriff, you want to do the honors?" McAllister moved slowly, like a man waking from a long sleep. He pulled handcuffs from his belt. "Reverend Crane, you have the right to..." "This isn't over." Crane's voice was rising now, shrill and desperate. "I have friends. I have influence. I have..." "You have the right to remain silent," McAllister said, and snapped the cuffs around his wrists. "I suggest you use it." Deputy Warren took Crane's arm and led him toward the horses. The Reverend was still shouting about persecution, about conspiracy, about the wrath of God, but his voice faded as they moved away. Emma stood frozen in the yard. Caleb walked to her slowly, not wanting to startle her, not sure what to say. "It's over," he said quietly. "He can't hurt you anymore." She looked up at him. Those green eyes, Maggie's eyes, were bright with tears she hadn't shed. "Is it really over?" "The hard part is, the rest is just paperwork." She let out a breath, a long, shaking exhale that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs. "I never thought anyone would believe me. I believed you." "Why?" Caleb thought about how to answer. About the truth and what it meant. "Because 17 years ago, someone needed me to believe them, and I didn't," he said. "My daughter. She was sick. She was dying, and I wasn't there to hear her." He knelt down so their eyes were level. "I couldn't save her. I couldn't save my wife. I couldn't save anyone I loved. But I could save you. I could choose to believe you and fight for you and be here when it mattered. Emma's chin trembled. Is that what I am? A second chance? You're more than that. You're family. The tears finally fell. She crashed into him, arms around his neck, face pressed against his shoulder, sobbing the way she had last night in Lily's room. But this time, there was something different in it. Something lighter. Relief. Hope. The beginning of trust. Caleb held her and let her cry. Marshall Holloway approached his boots, crunching on the frozen ground. Mr. Weston, a word. Caleb looked up, but didn't let go of Emma. The custody situation, Holloway said. It's complicated. The papers the Reverend filed are technically legal, regardless of his crimes. The child's a ward of the county now, which means she goes into the system unless someone claims her proper. I'm claiming her. On what grounds? Blood. Marriage. Whatever it takes. Holloway studied him for a long moment. You said you don't have proof of the blood connection. I don't have letters, but I got something else. Caleb stood, keeping one hand on Emma's shoulder. My wife Margaret Weston died 17 years ago. But before we married, she spent 2 years in Ohio. She never told me why, said it was family business. He looked at Emma. This child's mother, Sarah Coulter, was born in Ohio, given to relatives as an infant by a young woman named Margaret. The dates line up. The eyes are the same. And Sarah Coulter told her daughter before she died to find the ranch with the iron sun. He pointed toward the gate. That gate. I forged it myself the year my daughter was born. Only 2 people in the world knew what it was called, me and my wife. If Sarah Coulter knew that name, if she passed it to her daughter, it's because her mother told her. Because Margaret told her. Holloway's eyes moved from Caleb to the gate to Emma. That ain't proof. That's coincidence. Then test us. Everyone turned. Emma had stopped crying. She was looking at Holloway with a certainty that seemed older than her years. Ask me things, she said. Things my mama told me about her mama. Things only family would know. Holloway frowned. I ain't sure that... My grandmother had a birthmark on her left shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon. My mama said she used to touch it when she was scared for luck. Caleb's breath caught. He remembered that birthmark. He remembered tracing it with his fingers on their wedding night, asking Maggie what it was. She'd laughed and called it her little moon. She's right, he said quietly. Maggie had that birthmark. That could be. My grandmother's favorite song was Lorena, Emma continued. She used to hum it when she cooked. My mama said she learned the melody before she learned her own name. Caleb's throat tightened. Maggie had hummed that song every morning. He'd heard it 1,000 times and never thought to ask why. It's true, he said. All of it. Holloway looked between them. Something in his hard face had softened. You're telling me this child is your wife's granddaughter? That she's been in the care of that man? He jerked his head toward Crane, without any family knowing she existed. Yes. And now you want to claim her. Take responsibility. Raise her as your own. Yes. Holloway was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a sheaf of papers. I got forms here for emergency custody transfer. Ain't permanent, you'll need a judge for that, but it'll keep her with you while the courts sort things out. He held out the papers. You sure about this, Mr. Weston? Taking on a child ain't simple, especially one who's been through what she's been through. Caleb took the papers without hesitation. I'm sure. Holloway nodded slowly. Then I suggest you find yourself a good lawyer and get that iron sun gate fixed. Looks like it's been closed a long time. He tipped his hat and walked back toward his horse. McAllister lingered, his face still gray with shame. Caleb, I don't. I should have. Yeah, you should have. Caleb met his eyes. But you didn't. And she survived anyway. Not because of you, but in spite of you. McAllister flinched. I know it don't mean much now, but I'm sorry. Well, it don't mean much, Caleb agreed. but maybe it's a start." The sheriff nodded, mounted his horse, and followed the others down the road. Doc Harland was the last to leave. He stopped in front of Emma, his bloodshot eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have spoken up. I should have—" "You're speaking now." Emma's voice was quiet, but there was no anger in it, just exhaustion. "That counts for something." Harland nodded, unable to speak. He mounted his horse and rode away, shoulders hunched, carrying the weight of his silence like a stone. Then it was just the three of them, Caleb, Emma, and Samuel, standing in the yard as the morning sun climbed higher and the riders disappeared down the road. "It's really over," Emma said. Not a question this time. A statement. A truth she was testing the weight of. "It's really over." She looked up at Caleb. "What happens now?" He thought about the papers in his hand. The courts. The lawyers. The long road ahead. "Now we go inside," he said. "We eat breakfast. We take care of the horses. We do the things that need doing. That's it. That's it. That's what family does. They wake up, they do the work, they take care of each other." He put his hand on her shoulder. "One day at a time. Until the days add up to years, and the years add up to a life." Emma considered this. "I ain't never had that," she said quietly. "A life, just survival, just getting through." "Then this is where that changes." She looked toward the house, toward the window where Maggie's lamp sat waiting to be lit, toward the door that led to Lily's room, to the doll on the pillow, to the beginning of something new. "Okay," she said. "One day at a time." Samuel appeared at Caleb's elbow. "Horses need feeding," he said. "And that barn cat's been yowling since dawn. Think he missed the girl." Emma's face softened. The first almost smile Caleb had seen since she'd arrived. "Biscuit," she said. "I named him Biscuit." "Foolish name for a cat." "He likes it." "He's a cat. He don't like anything." "He likes me." Samuel's mouth twitched. "Well, I suppose that's something." They walked toward the barn together, the old Blackfoot man and the bruised child, their voices fading into the morning air. Caleb stood alone in the yard watching them go. The papers were still in his hand. The weight of them felt different now, not like a burden, but like a promise. He thought about Maggie, about the daughter she'd given away, and the secret she'd carried to her grave. He wondered if she'd known somehow that this day would come, that her granddaughter would find her way here to the ranch with the iron sun, to the man who owed a debt he didn't even know about. He thought about Lily, about the room at the end of the hall, the doll on the pillow, the 17 years of silence that had finally broken. He thought about second chances, about grace, about staying when everything in you screamed to run, and for the first time in 17 years, Caleb Weston felt something that he'd forgotten how to feel. Hope. He walked to the iron sun gate. The chain still lay in the snow where it had fallen days ago. Rusted, ancient, no longer needed. He picked it up, carried it to the barn, and hung it on a nail beside the horse tack. Then he walked back to the gate. The iron sun caught the morning light golden and warm, the rust looking less like decay and more like age, like something that had earned its years. He didn't close it. He left it standing open. The days that followed moved like water finding its level. Emma woke each morning on the settee wrapped in Maggie's blanket, the porcelain doll tucked beside her. She'd lie there for a moment, listening to the sounds of the house. Samuel's boots on the kitchen floor, the pop and crackle of the fire, Caleb's low voice giving instructions for the day's work, and she'd remind herself that this was real. Not a dream. Not a trick. Real. On the third morning after Crane's arrest, she found Caleb at the kitchen table with a stack of papers and a pen that looked too small for his calloused hands. "What's all that legal things?" He didn't look up. "Custody forms, affidavits, enough paperwork to choke a horse." She sat down across from him. "You need help. You know how to read legal documents?" "No, but I know how to keep you company while you figure them out." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. Or gratitude. All right then, keep me company. She did. For 3 hours she sat there while he scratched his way through form after form, asking her questions when the papers required information about her mother, her grandmother, her history before Crane. What was your mama's birthday? March 15th. And your grandmother's Maggie's? Emma closed her eyes, trying to remember. Mama said it was in June. The 20th, maybe. She used to pick wildflowers on that day and leave them by the window. Said it was her way of remembering. Caleb's pen stopped moving. June 20th, he said quietly. That was Maggie's birthday. They looked at each other across the table. Another piece of proof. Another thread connecting them. I wish I'd known her, Emma said. My grandmother. I wish I'd had the chance. She would have loved you. How do you know? Because she had the biggest heart of anyone I ever met. Too big, maybe. Big enough to hold a secret for 30 years because she was scared of what letting it out would do. He set down the pen. She gave your mama up, but she never stopped loving her. I know that now. She carried that love like a stone in her chest, and she never told me because she didn't think I could understand. Could you? The question hung in the air. Back then, no. I was too wrapped up in my own grief to see hers. He met her eyes. But now I understand. Some things are too heavy to carry alone, and some secrets are kept not because we want to, but because we don't know how to share them. Emma nodded slowly. She understood that better than most. I got secrets too, she said quietly. Things I never told anyone. Things that happened at his house, that I pushed so far down, I almost forgot they were there. You don't have to tell me. I know, but maybe I want to, someday. She looked at him. When I'm ready. Whenever you're ready, I'll listen. It was such a simple thing, such a small promise. But Emma felt it land in her chest like a seed finding soil. Someone would listen. Someone would believe her. It was more than she'd ever had before. The lawyer came from Helena on the 5th day. His name was Frederick Marsh, and he was everything Caleb expected, sharp-eyed, well-dressed, carrying a leather case that probably cost more than most people made in a month. But there was something decent beneath the polish, something that softened when he looked at Emma. The custody case is straightforward, Marsh said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. Crane's arrest creates a vacancy in guardianship. You're claiming the child under blood relation through marriage. The court will require proof. What kind of proof? Documentation, letters, witnesses who can attest to the connection between your wife and the child's grandmother. I don't have letters. Maggie kept that secret close. Marsh frowned. Then we'll need to build the case another way. The child's testimony, physical resemblance, circumstantial evidence that establishes the link. The birthmark, Emma said. Both men turned to look at her. My mama told me my grandmother had a birthmark on her left shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon. Mr. Weston confirmed it. Marsh made a note. That's something. What else? The song, Lorena. My grandmother used to hum it. My mama learned it before she could talk. Verifiable. Caleb nodded. Samuel heard Maggie sing it 100 times. He can testify. Good. What about the gate? The Iron Sun. My mama knew about it, Emma said. She told me to find the ranch with the Iron Sun. Said the man there owed her a debt. Marsh looked up from his notes. A debt. That's what she said. A debt he didn't even know about. Do you know what she meant? Emma shook her head. Then she looked at Caleb. I think I'm starting to figure it out. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. Caleb spent those days preparing. Samuel helped him dig through old trunks in the attic, looking for anything that might serve as proof: photographs, letters, keepsakes from Maggie's life before they married. They found little. Maggie had been thorough in her erasure. But on the 8th day, Samuel emerged from the storage room with a small wooden box. Found this in the back, he said, setting it on the kitchen table. Behind the Christmas ornaments. It's got a lock. Caleb recognized it immediately. Maggie had brought it with her when they married, one of the few things from her old life she'd refused to leave behind. He'd asked about it once, and she'd said it held letters from her mother. He'd never asked again. Now he picked it up, felt the weight of it, the worn smoothness of the wood. I don't have a key. Don't need one. Samuel produced a thin piece of metal from his pocket. Lock's old. Won't take much. He worked at it for 30 seconds. There was a click, and the lid sprang open. Inside were letters. Dozens of them folded and yellowed with age, tied together with a ribbon that had once been blue but had faded to gray. Caleb picked up the first one and unfolded it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, careful and precise, the letters of someone who'd been taught to write properly. Dear Maggie, it began. I know you said not to write anymore. I know you said it was better this way. But I can't stop hoping that someday you'll want to know me, that someday the door you closed will open again. Caleb's hands shook. What is it? Emma asked. Letters from your mother, from Sarah. He looked up at her. She wrote to Maggie for years. Maggie kept every one. Emma crossed to the table and picked up another letter. Her eyes moved across the page and her face went pale. She wanted to meet her, Emma whispered. My mama, she wanted to meet her own mother. She wrote over and over asking for just one chance. What did Maggie say? Nothing. Emma's voice cracked. Look at the envelopes. They're all addressed to my mama, but they were never sent. Maggie wrote back, but she never mailed them. Caleb picked up one of the unsent replies. Maggie's handwriting, he'd know it anywhere. My darling Sarah. The letter began. I wish I had the words to explain why I can't see you. Not because I don't want to. There's nothing I want more. But I've built a life here. A husband, a daughter, and if you came, if we met, everything would crumble. He would know I lied to him. She would know she had a sister she never met. The truth would destroy everything I've tried to protect. Caleb read on his heartbreaking with every word. I think of you every day. Every single day. I see your face in my daughter's smile. I hear your voice in the wind. You're never gone from me, not really. But I can't have you here. I can't risk what meeting you would cost. Please forgive me. Please understand that this silence isn't rejection. It's the only kind of love I know how to give. The kind that protects from a distance. The kind that breaks my heart every day and still won't let go. Caleb set down the letter. His throat was too tight to speak. She loved her, Emma said quietly. My grandmother loved my mama. She just didn't know how to show it. She didn't know how to risk it, Caleb corrected. There's a difference. Is there? He thought about his own silence, his own walls. The 17 years he'd spent hiding behind grief because feeling something new seemed like a betrayal of what he'd lost. Maybe not, he said. Maybe they're the same thing. Emma picked up the unsent letters, held them against her chest. Can I keep these? They're yours. They always were. She nodded, her eyes bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. I think I understand now, she said. The debt. What my mama meant. What do you think she meant? She wasn't asking you to pay something back. She was asking you to finish what they couldn't. My grandmother, my mama. They both tried to reach across and they both failed. They both let fear stop them. Emma looked at him. But you didn't. You reached. You fought. You stayed. She took a shaking breath. The debt wasn't money or land or anything you could hold. It was just, her voice broke. It was just someone finally finishing what they started. Finally saying yes. Caleb pulled her into his arms. She didn't resist, didn't flinch, just leaned into him and let him hold her while the letters crinkled between them. Your mama would be proud of you, he said quietly. Both of them would. All the women in your line who loved from a distance and hoped from the shadows they'd look at you and see someone braver than any of them. I don't feel brave. Brave ain't a feeling, It's a choice. You made it when you crawled through my gate. You made it when you stood in front of that marshal and showed your scars. You make it every day you keep going." She pulled back and looked up at him. "You're brave too, you know. You opened that door, Lily's room. You went in after 17 years. That wasn't bravery. That was you." "What do you mean?" "You showed up and made me remember what I'd forgotten. That love doesn't end just because someone dies. That keeping them alive means opening doors, not closing them." He touched her cheek. "You're not just paying a debt, Emma. You're giving a gift. To me, to Maggie, to everyone who got lost in their own grief and forgot how to find their way out." The hearing took place in the county courthouse. It was a small room, plain and practical, with wooden benches, worn smooth by years of waiting. Judge Patterson sat behind a raised desk, his white hair and weathered face giving him the look of a man who'd seen everything and believed very little. Caleb sat at one table with Marsh. Emma sat beside him, dressed in a clean dress Mrs. Bishop had brought from her shop, a gift she'd said for the girl who'd been brave enough to speak. Marshal Holloway was there, along with Sheriff McAllister and Doc Harland, the townspeople who'd stood in the yard and listened, the witnesses who'd finally found their voices. The prosecutor presented the case against Crane first, the abuse, the neglect, the years of hidden violence. Then Marsh stood and presented the custody claim. The letters were entered as evidence. Sarah's desperate pleas, Maggie's unsent replies, the paper trail of a love that had never found its way home. Samuel testified about Maggie's song, her birthmark, the way she'd sometimes stand at the window and stare east, like she was looking for someone who wasn't there. Doc Harland testified about Emma's injuries, not just the recent ones, but the older wounds, the pattern of abuse that stretched back years. And then Emma took the stand. She told her story. All of it. The cellar, the belt, the prayers that came with pain. The nights she'd lain awake praying for someone to come, for someone to believe, for someone to see her as more than a burden to be broken. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Judge Patterson looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb. "Mr. Weston, you're asking this court to grant you custody of a child you've known for less than a month. You have no blood relation to her. Your only connection is through a wife who's been dead for 17 years and a secret she never shared with you." He leaned forward. "Why should I believe this isn't just a wealthy man trying to buy himself a family?" Caleb stood. "Your Honor, I spent 17 years building walls. Walls around my land, my house, my heart. I shut out everyone who tried to get close because I was scared that losing them would break me, the way losing my wife and daughter broke me." He looked at Emma. "Then this child showed up at my door, beaten, starving, alone. And she looked at me with my wife's eyes and told me I owed her something I didn't even know about." He turned back to the judge. "She was right. I did owe her. Not because of blood or marriage or legal documents. I owed her because I'd spent 2 decades running from the very thing she needed most: someone to stay. Someone to fight for her. Someone to say, 'You matter. You're worth protecting. You're not alone.'" His voice roughened. "I can't give her back the years she lost. I can't erase what that man did to her. But I can give her a home, a name, a family. I can give her the thing my wife wanted to give her mother, and couldn't: a door that stays open. A light in the window. A promise that doesn't break." He sat down. The courtroom was silent. Judge Patterson looked at the letters, at the testimony, at the evidence spread before him. Then he looked at Emma. "Young lady, you've heard what Mr. Weston said. Do you want to live with him?" Emma stood her small frame straight, her voice steady. "Yes, sir." "You understand what that means? The commitment he's making, the responsibility?" "I do." "And you believe he'll keep his word?" Emma looked at Caleb, at the man who'd opened his door in the middle of the night and let in a stranger, who'd lied for her, fought for her, opened a locked room after 17 years because she needed him to be whole. "Yes, sir," she said. "I believe him." Patterson nodded slowly. The court finds that Caleb Weston has demonstrated sufficient grounds for emergency custody of the minor child, Emma Grace Coulter. A permanent custody hearing will be scheduled for 6 months from today, at which time the court will evaluate the placement and make a final determination. He brought down his gavel. Until then, the child is remanded to Mr. Weston's care. This court is adjourned. The walk back to the ranch felt different. Emma rode in front of Caleb on the bay mare, the letters tucked inside her coat, the judge's words still ringing in her ears. Samuel rode beside them, silent as always, his dark eyes watching the road ahead. The iron sun gate stood open as they approached. Caleb had left it that way. He'd never close it again. As they passed through, Emma looked up at the iron rays spreading outward, catching the winter light. "It's beautiful," she said. "The gate. I didn't see it proper before when I came through the first time. I was too scared. And now it looks like what my mama said, like a sun that never sets." Caleb dismounted and helped her down. She stood in the yard, looking at the house, the barn, the land stretching out in every direction. "This is home now," she said, testing the word, tasting it. "If you want it to be." She turned to look at him. "I ain't never had a home, not a real one. Just places I stayed until they weren't safe anymore. This one's safe." "You promise?" "I promise." She nodded slowly. Then she walked toward the house, and Caleb followed, and somewhere behind them, Samuel smiled a smile that no one saw. That night, Emma asked to see Maggie's grave. It was dark. It was cold. Every sensible part of Caleb said they should wait until morning, but he lit a lantern and took her anyway. The cemetery sat on the hill east of the house where the sunrise would touch it first every morning. The stones were simple gray granite, hand-carved letters, nothing fancy. Emma stood before them in silence. Margaret Ann Weston, beloved wife, 1849 to 1878. Lily, Margaret Weston, our springtime, 1874 to 1880. "They're together," Emma whispered. "That's good. They shouldn't be alone." "They're not. Not anymore." She knelt in the snow and pressed her hand against Maggie's stone. "I found him," she said quietly. "The man with the iron sun. Mama sent me and I found him. And he's good, Grandma. He's real good. You chose right when you married him. I wish you could have seen how he fought for me. I wish Mama could have seen." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'm going to stay. I'm going to let him take care of me. And someday when I'm old enough, I'm going to take care of him too. That's what family does. That's what you and Mama taught me, even though you never meant to." She stood wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I love you," she whispered. "Both of you. All of you. Every woman who came before me and carried her secrets and broke her heart and kept going anyway. I love you, and I'm going to make you proud." Caleb put his arm around her shoulders. They stood there together, the lantern light flickering, the stars wheeling overhead. And in the silence of the snow and the stone and the night, something healed. Not completely, not all at once, but enough. Enough to start. Winter softened into something gentler as the weeks passed. Emma learned the rhythm of the ranch the way a child learns to walk one step at a time, sometimes stumbling, always getting back up. She woke before dawn most mornings, not because anyone asked her to, but because the quiet hours before sunrise had become something precious. A time when the house was still and the fire crackled low, and she could sit by the window with Maggie's blanket around her shoulders, watching the sky turn from black to gray to gold. Caleb found her there one morning, her breath fogging the glass, her fingers tracing patterns in the frost. "You're up early." She didn't startle. She'd stopped startling weeks ago. Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking. About what? About how different everything is. She turned to look at him. 6 weeks ago I was in a cellar, Now I'm here, warm, fed, safe. She said the last word, like she was still testing it, still making sure it fit. You are safe, Caleb said. That ain't changing. I know. That's what's strange. She pulled the blanket tighter. I spent so long being scared that I forgot what not scared felt like. Now I'm learning it all over again, and sometimes my body don't believe what my head knows. Caleb sat down in the chair across from her. That'll take time, longer than you want probably. The body holds on to fear even after the mind lets go. How do you know? Because I did the same thing, after Lily died, after Maggie left. He looked at his hands. I spent 17 years scared to feel anything because feeling meant hurting. My body learned to shut down before the pain could start. What changed? You showed up. Emma was quiet for a moment. I didn't do anything special. I just needed help. That's exactly what you did. You needed help and you asked for it. You trusted me enough to let me give it. He met her eyes. That ain't nothing, Emma. That's everything. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. You're getting soft, Mr. Weston. Don't tell Samuel. He'll never let me hear the end of it. She laughed. It was a sound Caleb hadn't heard from her before, bright and unexpected like a bird singing in winter. He realized with a start that felt like waking up that he hadn't heard himself laugh in 17 years either. Maybe it was time to change that. The permanent custody hearing was scheduled for the first week of April. Marsh came out from Helena twice to prepare them. He brought stacks of documents, lists of questions, strategies for presenting their case. But mostly, he brought reassurance. The emergency custody has gone well, he said during his final visit. No incidents, no complaints. The child is healthy, enrolled in school, integrated into the community. Judge Patterson will take all of that into account. What are our chances? Caleb asked. Good. Better than good if I'm honest. The blood connection through your wife, the letters, the testimony, it all adds up. And Crane's conviction helps. A jury found him guilty of abuse. That validates everything, Emma said. Crane was convicted. Last week, didn't you hear? Marsh looked surprised. 20 years in the territorial prison. The judge called it a systematic pattern of cruelty masked as Christian discipline. It made all the papers in Helena. Caleb felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he hadn't known he was carrying. Emma, no. I wanted to tell her in person. They found her in the barn brushing down the bay mare with the orange cat weaving between her feet. She'd grown in the months since her arrival, not just taller but steadier. The hunted look had faded from her eyes. The flinching had stopped. Emma, Marsh said, I have news about Reverend Crane. She went still. Her hand stopped moving on the horse's flank. What kind of news? He was convicted. 20 years in prison. He won't hurt anyone ever again. For a long moment, Emma didn't move. Then she set down the brush, walked to the barn door, and looked out at the mountains. 20 years, she said quietly. I was in his care for 2. 2 years felt like forever. What does 20 feel like? I don't know, but he'll find out. She turned back. Her face was calm, but something moved behind her eyes. Is it wrong that I don't feel happy? What do you feel? Tired. Just tired. Like I've been holding something up for so long that I forgot I was carrying it. And now it's gone, but my arms still ache. Caleb stepped forward. That's not wrong. That's healing. It don't feel like healing. It feels like nothing. Sometimes nothing is the first step. The absence of pain before the presence of something better. Emma considered this. My mama used to say that grief was like a river. You can't go around it. You can't go over it. You got to go through it, and the going through is the hardest part. She was right. She was right about a lot of things. Emma's voice softened. She was right about you. The night before the hearing, Caleb couldn't sleep. He found himself walking the halls of the house he'd built, touching the walls he'd raised, remembering the life that had filled these rooms before grief emptied them out. The piano in the corner of the sitting room. Maggie used to play it on Sunday evenings while Lily danced in circles, her small feet pattering on the wooden floor. The rocking chair by the fireplace. Eleanor had nursed Lily there, singing lullabies in a voice that cracked with exhaustion and love. The window by the front door. The lamp that had guided him home 1,000 times, then gone dark for 17 years, now burning again every night since Emma came. He stopped at Lily's door. It stood open now. It had stood open since the night he'd finally walked through it. The dust had been cleaned away. The curtains had been washed. The doll still sat on the pillow, but it wasn't alone anymore. Emma had added a worn blanket and a book of fairy tales that Samuel had bought her in town. She'd made the room hers, but she'd kept Lily's spirit in it. "You're up late?" He turned. Emma stood in the hallway, barefoot, Maggie's blanket around her shoulders. "Couldn't sleep." "Me neither." She walked to stand beside him, looking into the room. "I still think about her sometimes, Lily. About what it would have been like if she'd lived." "What do you think?" "I think she'd be grown by now. Married, maybe. With children of her own." Emma's voice was soft. "I think she'd have your stubbornness and your mama's laugh. I think she'd have stood up for me if she'd known what was happening." Caleb's throat tightened. "She would have, without question. I wish I'd known her. I wish I'd known all of them. Lily, Maggie, my mama's mama, all the women in my line who loved and lost and kept going. You carry them with you, in your eyes, in your courage, in the way you face things head on instead of running. Is that what you see when you look at me?" "That's what I see." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. "Tomorrow after the hearing, no matter what happens, I want you to know something." "What's that?" "You already saved me. The papers and the judge and the legal words, they're just making official what you already did. You saw me. You believed me. You opened your door when you could have kept it locked." Her fingers tightened around his. "Whatever that judge says tomorrow, you're my family. Not because of blood or marriage or law. Because you chose to be. Because you stayed." Caleb felt something crack inside him. Something old and hard that had been calcified there for nearly 2 decades. He knelt down so their eyes were level. "Emma Grace Coulter, you didn't just save yourself when you crawled through that gate. You saved me too. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "A reason to open doors instead of closing them. A reason to light lamps instead of letting them go dark." He touched her cheek. "A reason to believe that love doesn't end when someone dies. It just finds new ways to grow." Emma's eyes glistened. "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." "It's the truest thing I've ever said." She leaned forward and wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on tight. Caleb held her back. The house was quiet around them. The lamp burned in the window. And somewhere outside, the iron sun gate stood open, waiting for morning. The courthouse was fuller than it had been the first time. Word had spread about the hearing. About the millionaire rancher who'd taken in an abused orphan. About the child who'd stood up in court and shown her scars. About the letters that had revealed a secret spanning 3 generations. People came from all over the territory to watch. Judge Patterson took his seat, his white hair gleaming in the morning light. He looked older than he had at the first hearing, or maybe just more tired. "This court is convened to determine permanent custody of the minor child Emma Grace Coulter," he said. "Mr. Marsh, your opening statement." Marsh stood, but before he could speak, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. A woman walked in. She was old 70, at least, maybe older, with silver hair pinned back in a style that had been fashionable decades ago. She walked with a cane, but her eyes were sharp and clear. Blue eyes. Maggie's eyes. Emma's eyes. "Your Honor," the woman said, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. I apologize for the interruption, but I believe I have something to contribute to these proceedings. Patterson frowned. And you are? My name is Constance Millbrook. I was Margaret Weston's aunt, her mother's sister. She stopped at the front of the courtroom leaning on her cane. I'm the one who took in her firstborn daughter when Maggie was 15. I raised Sarah Coulter as my own. The courtroom erupted. Patterson banged his gavel. Order, order, I said. The noise subsided. Everyone was staring at the old woman. Mrs. Millbrook, Patterson said carefully. Are you saying you're this child's great-great-aunt? I'm saying I'm the closest blood relative she has left. And I'm saying I can prove everything Mr. Weston has claimed. She reached into her bag and produced a bundle of papers tied with faded ribbon. Letters. From Maggie to me, written over 30 years. She never stopped writing even after she married. She never stopped asking about Sarah. She never stopped loving the daughter she gave away. She set the papers on the judge's desk. I also have birth records, baptismal certificates, documentation of Sarah's origins that I've kept hidden for decades because Maggie asked me to, because she was ashamed, because she thought her secret would destroy her marriage if it ever came to light. Patterson picked up the papers, examined them. Why are you coming forward now? Because I read about the trial, about that monster who hurt my great-great-niece. Constance's voice shook with fury. And I realized that my silence had cost Sarah her mother, had cost Emma her family, had cost everyone too much for too long. She turned to look at Emma. I'm 91 years old. I'm not going to live much longer. But before I die, I wanted to set things right. I wanted to tell the truth that should have been told 50 years ago. Emma stood slowly. Her face was white. Her hands were shaking. You knew my mother. I raised her. From the day Maggie placed her in my arms until the day she married and moved west with her husband. Constance's eyes filled with tears. She was the light of my life, and when she died, when I got that letter saying consumption had taken her, I thought my heart would stop. Why didn't you come for me after she died? Why didn't you? I didn't know where you were. The letter that told me of Sarah's death said nothing about a child, nothing about what had happened to you. Constance's voice broke. I spent 2 years trying to find you, and then I read about the trial, and I realized you'd been in that man's hands the whole time, that you'd suffered while I searched. She reached out a trembling hand. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't find you sooner. Emma stared at her, at this stranger who carried her blood, at this connection she'd never known existed. Then she walked forward and took the old woman's hand. You're here now. That's what matters. Constance pulled her into an embrace, and they stood there, 2 generations of a family finally reunited, while the courtroom watched in silence. Patterson cleared his throat. This is irregular, highly irregular. But if this evidence is genuine, he held up the papers, it changes the nature of these proceedings significantly. It don't change what I'm asking for, Caleb said, standing. I still want custody. I still want to give Emma a home. But you're not blood. No, but I'm family. Caleb looked at Constance. Mrs. Millbrook, you've got every right to claim this child. You're her blood relative. The court would probably favor you. Constance shook her head slowly. I'm 91 years old, Mr. Weston. I live in a boarding house in Ohio. I can barely climb stairs anymore. She looked at Emma. I came here to give her the truth, not to take her away from the first real home she's ever had. She turned to the judge. I support Mr. Weston's custody claim, fully and without reservation. This man did what no one else could. He believed a child when no one else would. He fought for her when everyone else looked away. That's not nothing. That's everything. Patterson looked at the papers again. At Emma, at Caleb, at the old woman leaning on her cane. This court has seen a lot of custody cases, he said slowly. Most of them are about property, about money, about adults using children as bargaining chips in their own disputes. He set down the papers. This case is different. This case is about a child who was failed by everyone who should have protected her, the church, the county, the system. And it's about the people who finally stood up when standing up cost them something. He looked at Caleb. Mr. Weston, you have no legal obligation to this child, no blood connection, no requirement under law. And yet you risked your reputation, your standing and your peace to give her what she needed. He looked at Emma. And you, young lady, you had every reason to give up, to accept what was done to you, to disappear. Instead, you fought. You spoke the truth even when no one believed you. You trusted a stranger when trust had only ever brought you pain. He picked up his gavel. This court finds that Caleb Weston has demonstrated exceptional fitness as a guardian. The evidence of blood connection through Margaret Weston, corroborated by Mrs. Millbrook's testimony and documentation, establishes a legal basis for the custody claim. He brought the gavel down. Permanent custody of Emma Grace Coulter is hereby granted to Caleb Weston. This matter is closed. The ride home was quiet. Constance had stayed in town. She was too tired for the journey, and Doc Harland had insisted she rest before traveling back to Ohio. But she'd promised to write. Promised to send everything she had about Sarah, about Maggie, about the family Emma had never known. "You're not my blood," Emma said as they passed through the iron sun gate. "Not really. The papers say you're my guardian, but we're not actually related." "Does that matter to you?" She thought about it. "No, I don't think it does. Blood is just blood. It's what you do with it that counts. What your grandmother did, giving up your mother, keeping her secret, was that wrong?" Emma was quiet for a long moment. "I used to think so. I used to be angry at her, at all of them, for the choices they made that ended up hurting my mama. That ended up hurting me." She looked at the gate as they passed through at the iron sun catching the afternoon light. "But now, I think they were all just doing the best they could, with what they had, in the time they lived in. Nobody gets it perfect. Nobody knows how their choices are going to ripple out and affect people who haven't even been born yet." She turned to look at Caleb. "You didn't get it perfect either. You shut yourself away for 17 years. You let grief turn you into stone. You closed doors that should have stayed open." "I did. But then you changed. You opened the door. You let me in." She smiled. "That's all any of us can do, isn't it? Make mistakes, learn from them, and try to do better. That's what being human means." Caleb pulled the horse to a stop and looked at her. "When did you get so wise?" "I've been paying attention." He laughed, actually laughed. The sound surprised him, rusty from disuse, but real. "Well, keep paying attention. You might have to teach me a thing or two." "Already have been." That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Samuel had made stew that was actually good, and they'd eaten until they couldn't eat anymore. Constance's letters sat in a box on the kitchen table, waiting to be read. The doll was propped up in Lily's window, where Emma had placed it that morning. "I want to do something," Emma said. "What's that?" "The lamp. The one in the window. Mama Maggie used to light it to guide you home, right?" "She did." "And you stopped lighting it after she left?" "I did." Emma stood and walked to the window. The lamp sat there cold and dark. "I want to light it again, every night. Not for you, you're already here, but for anyone else who might be lost. Anyone else who needs to know there's a place where they're welcome." She looked back at him. "Would that be okay?" Caleb's throat tightened. "That would be more than okay." Emma struck a match and touched it to the wick. The flame caught small at first, then steady. Golden light spilled across the glass, pushing back the dark. "There," she said. "Now anyone who's lost can find their way." She came back to the porch and sat down beside him. Samuel appeared in the doorway, looked at the lamp, looked at them, and nodded once before disappearing back inside. "What happens now?" Emma asked. Now we live, one day at a time. We do the work that needs doing. We take care of the land, the animals, each other. That's it. That's everything. She leaned against his shoulder, and he put his arm around her. I used to dream about this, she said quietly. When I was in the cellar. When everything was dark and cold, and I couldn't see any way out. I used to close my eyes and imagine a place like this. A fire burning. A blanket around my shoulders. Someone who cared whether I lived or died. And now I don't have to imagine anymore. Now it's real. She was quiet for a moment. Do you think they know Mama and Grandma Maggie? Do you think they can see this? Caleb thought about Lily. About Maggie. About all the people he'd loved and lost and finally learned to grieve. I don't know for certain, but I believe they do. I believe love doesn't just disappear when people die. It goes somewhere. It waits. And when the people they loved finally find their way home, it comes back to them. Emma nodded slowly. I like believing that. I'm going to keep believing it. The sun sank below the mountains. The stars came out one by one. The lamp burned in the window steady and bright. And somewhere in the silence between heartbeats, between the end of one story and the beginning of another, something shifted in the universe. A debt finally paid. A door finally open. A family finally whole. Caleb looked at the iron sun gate standing open at the end of the drive. He thought about closing it, about protecting what he had, about the old habits of fear and self-preservation that had ruled him for so long. Then he looked at Emma, this child who had walked through his gate with nothing but her mother's last words and her grandmother's eyes. The gate would stay open. It would stay open forever. Because that was what love did. It opened doors. It lit lamps. It welcomed the lost and the broken and the afraid. And it never, ever closed. Emma fell asleep against his shoulder as the night deepened. Caleb didn't move. He just sat there holding her, watching the stars wheel overhead and the lamp burn in the window. He thought about the man he'd been 6 weeks ago. The stone man. The closed man. The man who'd spent 17 years building walls against a grief he couldn't face. That man was gone. In his place was someone new. Someone who'd learned that walls don't protect, they imprison. That grief unexpressed doesn't fade, it hardens. That the only way out of the dark is to let someone else light the way. He'd spent his whole life trying to be strong, trying to be invincible, trying to be the man who never needed anyone. Emma had taught him the truth. The strongest thing a person could do was need someone, was ask for help, was open a door and say, "Come in. You're safe here." He looked down at her sleeping face, at the peace that had finally settled over her features, at the trust that had taken weeks to build and would take years to fully heal. "Thank you," he whispered. She didn't stir, but somehow he knew she heard. The wind moved through the cottonwoods, gentle and warm. The lamp flickered once, then burned steady, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called, not lonely this time, but singing. Singing to a world that had finally, impossibly, miraculously come right. Caleb Weston had spent 17 years believing he was alone. That grief was a prison, and love was a memory, and hope was something that happened to other people. He'd been wrong. Hope wasn't something that happened. It was something you chose, something you built, something you opened your door to even when you were scared, especially when you were scared. He'd chosen hope when he pulled Emma through his window. She'd given him hope just by existing, and together they'd proven what the iron sun gate had always meant, that after the longest darkness, the light always comes. Not because the world changes, but because the people in it do. Emma stirred, opened her eyes, looked up at him. "I had a dream," she murmured. "About Mama." She was smiling. She said, "You found him." "What did you say back?" "I said, no, Mama. He found me." She closed her eyes again. Caleb held her close. The lamp burned in the window. the gate stood open. And for the first time in 17 years, Caleb Weston slept without dreaming of what he'd lost, because he'd finally found something worth waking up for.